And Julianne will ask you to watch the YouTube, and when you see it go live, just give us a heads up.
Will do. It's there, Shirley, and I will put it up on the website right now.
Okay, we're good to start. Councillor Perry.
All right, thank you very much. All right, everybody, call the Corporate Residential Service Committee to order. First, we'll have the land acknowledgement, and I want to acknowledge that East Hants is in Mi'kma'ki and the district of Spaganagity and the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Next, I'll be looking for the approval of the agenda of all subcommittees.
So moved.
Moved by the Deputy Warden.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Knockwood. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is passed. All right, I'm looking for approval of the minutes of December 14th, 2021. Moved by the Warden. Seconded by Councillor Garden Cole. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion is passed. Next, we're looking for new employee introductions. Who's going to take the first one?
Should be Elaine.
Alana,
Alana. Okay.
who I do not see on screen right now. So I guess that's me. Thank you, Councillor Perry. Brittany McDonnell has joined us as the aquatic supervisor at the East Hants Aquatic Center. As you may know, Brittany is local to the area. She has been one of our day camp and programming staff for a number of years, and it's with great pleasure that we let the community know that she's joined us on a full-time permanent basis over at the Aquatic Center. I think you'll be very happy with what she brings to your programming.
Excellent, thank you. And I guess it's probably on to you for the next one as well. Employee recognition. Adam Clarkson for 5 years.
So with the Zoom meeting, we've suspended formal recognition, but I do want to recognize Adam. He's been our manager of recreation and aquatics, director of parks, recreation and culture, and is now our director of corporate services. So we're very privileged to have Adam as a member of our staff. And when this is all over, we'll do some formal employee recognition of the employees who have been hitting these milestones during the pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you, CEO. Next, we'll have the 2022-2023 budget presentation, business plans and tax analysis. Sue Surratt, you're up.
I can't stop my video. Shirley, can you assist me? I'm blocked.
You should, you want to screen share? So
Actually, I can't undo my video.
okay, hang on.
It says I can't stop.
Okay, ask to start video. There you go. It
Thank
should
you very
let
much.
you. There you go. And you should be able to screen share.
Thank you very much. Do that right now. There we go. Good morning through the chair.
Morning.
I'm very happy to be here this morning to start the draft budget presentation process. It's been very hectic with, as you know, many challenges with COVID and so on and so forth, but I'm very comfortable with what we have here today. And for those that are new or newer, we certainly try to keep this relatively informal. I welcome any questions as we go along. Please feel free through the chair. We would appreciate it. If there's anything during the presentation today or throughout the budget process that you would like more information, we can bring that back at the next meeting, or if you want further analysis. Today, we will start with, here we go. As you can see there on the slide, this is the process. We'll start with the assessment overview. We're starting with the tax analysis, which council would have seen attached to the agenda that was posted on Friday. We also posted the budget business plans, draft business plans yesterday, late in the day. For everyone's benefit, we don't plan to go into very much detail on the business plans today, and that'll give councillors an opportunity to review the document in detail, and we'll start that process at the next budget meeting. So we'll do an overview. We'll provide the proposed rates that are in the draft budget. We'll go over the tax burden. We'll talk about RCMP, probably more in detail than we normally do, with the things that are happening with that. As councillors are familiar, there was some changes and finalization of the contract with RCMP that was retro back to 2016. We'll look at education and how that affects the GTR. We'll go over the reserves and other sources of revenue. And then we'll get into the departmental business plans, which I said just earlier, sorry, that we probably won't go. We'll just start that. We'll probably do an overview of that, depending on how quickly or how we progress with the tax analysis today. I have the community partnership and general government grants listed there. That will be presented this afternoon by PRC. The HR report will be posted later on throughout the budget presentation, and CAO will answer any questions in regards to that. And then we'll proceed after that to the capital budget and the water utility. That will be in February. And then we'll maintain a list throughout the whole process of anything that council would like us to consider changing or removing, changing the tax rates and so on and so forth. So again, if you have any questions at any time, just let us know as we go through. And today, Janice and Jordan will also be presenting some of the document as well. And they'll be on screen as that comes up. Sorry. So one thing that I would like to point out that impacts most of the departmental budgets this year, which is a little bit more unique than in prior years, is that in all areas, we've seen an increase in insurance. So you'll see an increase this year of 15% throughout the document. It is substantial, but we've been working with our insurance provider, and Mike Hatfield oversees this, and this is what we're being told the increase is going to be. So we've included that for your information. Also, we're seeing fuel costs rise substantially over last year. You may recall, many of you may recall that the fuel costs were quite low due to COVID and lack of travel, but this year they're on the rise. So we've included an increase throughout, not necessarily the same amount, but it's approximately 10%. And the other thing that we're seeing a large increase in is chemicals. There's a few reasons for that. Again, COVID and easy access to them. And then just supply. So you will see that as well in a few of the departmental budgets. So I wanted to point that out before we started. So when we start, we receive the assessment roll from PVSC. So that's the jump off for this, the tax rates is the assessments. And that helps us to set the draft general tax rate. We also use the assessments for the area rates, except for the dwelling unit. That's a flat fee, and that hasn't changed this year. And that, in then turn, generates the tax bill that you see. And the other thing that we have is the wastewater management fee. And I'm happy to say at this point in the draft budget that we have made no changes to the wastewater management fee. We held it $2.20 per cubic meter. There's no change to the area rates, except for a couple of small tweaks, which you'll see further on in the document in the presentation today. And we've done what we could to mitigate the tax burden. But as we go through that, councillors can decide what and if any changes you want to make. And we can bring back analysis as well at the end or in the next budget presentation if you want to make any changes. So we received the roll late December and we uploaded it, that started the process. For councillors' benefit, there is 2 billings each year. There's an interim bill which goes out early April and it's due in June 1st, and there's a final bill that goes out in August and it's now due October 1st. That date just changed in council's policy. It used to be September 30th. And I would like to note here that the assessment notices have gone out. There's 30 days for property owners to appeal. The assessment notices were sent out starting January 10th. So certainly councillors, if you if you're in discussion with your constituents and they have a concern about the rising increase in or any concerns about their assessment and their assessment notice, certainly direct them to PVSC. They have 30 days to appeal it. If there's an error, then PVSC will correct that and that'll flow through to us. Just checking my notes here, make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so the next slide is in
Sue?
regards, yeah.
I believe we may have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, through the chair, if I'm recognized. Yeah, I guess I am. All right, first thing, paper copies, or when are they available currently or whatever? Because that's what I rely on.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Because the documents were late being prepared, we will have paper printed copies and binders prior to the next budget meeting. We should, after this presentation, we should be able to pull all that together. And if it is okay with councillors, if you wanted to pick them up, we could do that. Leave them here where we're working virtually. But yes, and I apologize for not having those available before today. Thank you, Councillor Rhino.
Okay, I'd like to have one and then put it in as soon as they're ready. Just give me a call and I'll pick it up. And number 2, you're talking about the assessment roll on January the 10th. So, and you're saying 30 days to appeal. Is that 30 days from the time you receive your notice, or is it 30 days from January 10th, which would make it the same for everyone?
That's correct. 30 days from January 10th to appeal.
So is that 30 working days, 30 calendar days, or
Hi, Peter.
It's 30 calendar days. So mid-February, February 10th is the, and there,
How you doing?
I mean,
so when I guess instead of saying 30 days from January, why don't they just say it has to be appealed by February 10th?
I guess I say 30 days because each year the assessment date changes. So they say 30 days from when they release it.
All right, thanks. You makes no sense to me. I mean, why can't, they should be able to give a date instead of saying 30 days from this date. It's a lot simpler, but anyway, It is what it is.
Sure. I can follow up on that. Get more
Is that all,
information.
Councilor Rhino?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Rhino, there is an actual date. The information that was shared on our website, the legislation says 30 days, but this year the actual date is that February 10th date that Sue was giving.
Right.
So there is information on social media that we've shared from the Property Valuation Services Corporation to the public, and that would have been in everybody's assessment notices as well.
So the exact date then would have been in an assessment notice, because I haven't opened mine up.
February 10th is the appeal date
Okay, good.
for 2022, but it does change every year.
So everyone's aware it's February 10th instead of going to the calendar and start counting, I guess.
Yes,
So,
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, we have another question from Councilor Tingley.
Okay.
Well, I think it's been answered. The date is written on the bottom of the assessment form, and It's on the municipal website, so there's no confusion over the date.
Thank you, Councillor Gandy. Thanks.
All right, carry on, Sue.
Okay, so this slide just shows the breakout of different types of assessment that we have. There's residential, which for our purposes is code 01 from PBSC. There's resource code 03 and commercial code 02. And we also receive the dwelling information from PBSC, and we use that for the waste management fee. So that comes over from the roll. So this is what it looks like from the filed roll. And 30 days, I already mentioned that. And I mentioned that if there's any mistakes, PBSC will correct that and it gets corrected through our system. Sorry. The other types of assessment that generate revenue are forest and wind farm and farm property acreage, which comes from the province through a grant in lieu. And there's also grant in lieu's Crown land, federal and provincial, and you'll see that throughout the document as we go through. So as I mentioned, the property assessments are out to the public, and for everyone's benefit, it's always a year behind. So the information that's on the roll is from January 1st, 2021 to December 2021. And it's a year behind normally because it has to cut off in end of November. In that, there's a capped amount, and it's about 77% of accounts, property accounts are capped under this program. And I will talk about the CAP program a little bit further on, the assessment capped program. And this year, which is very noteworthy, it's 5.4%. And I think most councillors are already familiar with that. Last year, it was 0.3%. So property owners will see that increase on their assessment notice, and that's in throughout the budget. And again, we encourage anybody that has any concerns about their notice to contact PBSC Property Valuation Services. So these are the things that make up the general tax rate. There's the RCMP, which we will talk about further on in the presentation, and other protective services. There's animal control and all of the other things you see there on the slide. There's provincial transfers, which what is noteworthy about that is some of those council has very little control of. One of them is education. So that's worth noting as we go through this budget document. There's libraries, public housing. Public housing is another item that we're seeing an increase in, and that comes through the province as well. We talked about PBSC. In general administration, all of the departments that are there on your screen are what make up costs that roll into the general tax rate, including all of the different departments, economic and business development, parks, rec and culture, which includes the aquatic center. And now we also have the sportsplex that we have acquired, and planning, development, and roads and operations. So all of these make up the general tax rate, the costs that we need to raise on the tax rate. The waste management fee, again, is calculated using a dwelling unit. So every person, every property owner that has the dwelling pays the flat fee of $220. That rate has not changed in the draft budget. The break even this year is $207, and the remainder that we raise goes into reserves to pay off future debt. So then we also will be going through the area rates, and they mostly are, all except for what we discussed, are based on assessment. So as you can see there, we have the urban service rates that we'll talk about, street lights, sportsplex. Sportsplex has its own area rate, the Shubenacadie water utility deficit, and we'll speak further about that, but the utility deficit has decreased over last year, and this year will be the last year that property owners will be paying that. It'll be paid off. And then there's the Mount Uniacke recreation rate. So all of the rates are per 100 of assessment. And for Shubenacadie and Milford, they pay us a surcharge because their assessments are lower than the rest of the corridor. So they contribute to the urban service rate costs. And Milford also pays a different rate incorporated into their area rate because they are not on water billing, and we charge wastewater rates through the water billing process. So we have to incorporate that on their tax bill. And it's based on consumption, as I said. We bill it quarterly, and that goes over into the general tax to cover the urban service rate portion of the wastewater. Goes over onto the operations, sorry. And we did not propose any increase there in this draft budget. It's still $10 per 1,000 gallons or $2.20 per cubic meter. And as we go through the presentation, we'll talk about rates for streetlights, for sidewalks, hydrants, etc. There's only one slight change in the streetlights rate, very minimal, and that's in UNIAC, which you'll see. So here's where we're going to have a brief discussion about the assessment cap. There's where it shows 77% of the residential properties are in some type of the cap program. Maybe they've just gone into it, or if they've been there for a long time. And this slide shows you how much revenue is lost based on the capped amount. And basically what that means is if we didn't have the cap program in place, we would be able to propose a decrease in the general tax rate here today. So if I go down to the next slide, you'll see that if council chose, they would be able to reduce the general tax rate by approximately 11 cents if everyone's assessment was based on market and not in the cap program. Sure. I think I have a question.
Councillor Hebb.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. You move the slide back, the next slide you just said, yeah.
Sure.
Is that like for 222, that's 250 million. Is that for 1 year, or is it keep increasing every year? Like it's 191 and 18 and 165. So I'm assuming each one of those is for each individual year.
Yes. So in this fiscal coming up, there's 250 million of assessment lost.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Which results in having to find that revenue, distribute it through the general tax rate. Right.
Okay, Councillor Rhino, you're up next.
I'd like to point out that yes, the tax rate may go down, but the assessments are going up to market value, and in the way it is right now with this real estate market up there, so you may pay a lower rate, but you're going to get a higher assess. So you're going to be paying right around the same amount of money anyway. So to me, I think it's kind of misleading when we say, yeah, we can lower the rate, but yeah, as well, the market value and assessments are going up. So that's what I just like to point out.
That's a really good point, Councillor Rhino. What it will do, though, is allow for a more equitable distribution of the billing and the burden across all taxpayers, because those that are not in the CAP program or just going into the CAP program pay a higher amount right now than those that are or could be, there are exceptions, but those that are in the CAP program for a long time and have higher assessments, they pay less of the burden overall.
Well,
contributing.
I understand that there are problems with this cap.
Correct.
But for us to say, oh yeah, if this wasn't here, we could have a cheaper rate. Yeah, we could have a cheaper rate, but people are going to blame. There's inequities in the system. I realize that, but the purpose of bringing in that cap was to try to keep property owners on their own properties, the ones that were are struggling to get by, because we had a bunch of foreign entities coming in here and swapping up land, buying up land and driving up the assessment. And really, we're seeing this again with the market the way it is. People coming from all across Canada and swapping up these properties, and the assessments are going up. So that, my point is it's kind of a misnomer, misleading to say, yeah, we can have a cheaper rate, but we also have to realize that the assessment values will be way above what they are now. But yes, I realize that there has to be some tweaking to this system. So that's all I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, CAO had her hand up.
I think I was just going to comment on the cap system, and Councillor Rhino is correct. The assessments are going up, but the folks in East Hants in particular that this phenomenon of the different tax amount is affecting most are those new homeowners, typically rural homes that aren't increasing as quickly and are closer to market with their cap value than some of the homes in the more urban areas. You know, this is a real problem. I don't think you're going to see any movement on it from the current provincial government. So it's something that is here to stay. But it is something that we need to educate people on. And there are, you know, there is likely going to be more on that coming from the NSFM and the AMA over the next little while. They had done a really insightful map that we can share again with councillors on who are the winners and the losers in the CAP program, and the lower income neighborhoods across Nova Scotia. Those folks are definitely paying more in property tax than they would otherwise be without the CAP program. So there are some real concerns still with this program, and everybody's situation is different. But I think some education, so people, we're not going to change the program right now, but I think it's important that people are aware of their own personal situation and how this program impacts them personally, which this map that has been done by the NSFM certainly highlights.
Thank you. Yes, because this definitely has an impact. There's you know, somebody buys and mortgages a home under their finances for $200,000, and all of a sudden it's now assessed at $450,000. I doubt that they would be able to float the taxes even with the reduced rate on that $450,000 because of the increase. And then the people who are buying homes right now at $450,000 are paying that $450,000. So it's, you know, there's personal accountability in there as well. It may not be equitable, but when somebody purchases a home for a certain price in their budget, they expect to pay taxes roughly in that realm and not have it spike like it has in the last number of years for some people. So, but yeah, there's definitely an issue with the system. Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said like resident in Shubenacadie pay higher urban service rate than the corridor. So if someone build a house in Shubenacadie and someone build a house in Almsdale, a new home, the assessment is going to be almost the same. Like, because they're not going to have like lower assessment in Shubenacadie, right? So for that person to pay higher rate than the one in Almsdale, like all across the board, I don't think it's right, because some people get punished because the others have lower assessment. So I think we should recognize those people that their assessment is in line with the other municipality, and probably not charge them that rate. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's fair.
Go ahead, Kim.
I would say through you, Mr. Chairman, historically speaking, what we've been told by PVSC is that they would be differently assessed. There would be a lower assessment in a home in Shubenacadie than in the rest of the urban service rate area, like in Elmsdale and Enfield in particular. So we can certainly check that theory out again, but certainly your neighborhood, and that's not necessarily sort of your subdivision, but the assessment neighborhoods are assessed differently depending on the location. Absolutely. So the folks who build new homes may be slightly at a disadvantage to some of the older homes, but what we tried to do when we put this in was to say, what would a split entry in Shubenacadie pay compared to the same split entry in Elmsdale Enfield? And that was where that that 12 cents came from. So we can certainly check out if the theory is still valid, but I would have no reason to think it has changed.
Thank you.
No other questions? All right, Sue, Katera, continue on.
Okay. So the next slide shows from the tax analysis on page 5 of the document, our overall growth. So you can see in residential, we had a 10.13% increase, which is very substantial, over 2.82 last year. Some of that is new construction, of course. We're seeing a fair amount of that, as councillors are familiar from all the planning developments that are happening. Resource didn't change that much, and commercial did increase substantially over last year, year over year, with a 10 million increase in construction and assessment for commercial. When we go further on, you're going to see that there were no new businesses added, no new accounts, no new commercial accounts that were added from the roll, but we had considerable construction from the lots that were sold in the business parks and throughout the East Hants. So that's what you're seeing is the development that's happening now. And we've added this. We don't really focus as much now on the split because we have so much residential growth, but the split hasn't changed much year over year as far as how much percentage is commercial and how much is residential. Both are growing, which is great for the municipality. And the next slide, I'm going to make it a little bigger for everyone to be able to see. There we go. Oops. This shows the overall assessment year over year between residential, commercial, resource. One thing of note that I will point out is in the commercial column, you'll see that the commercial assessment went down, but that is an anomaly. That's the sportsplex. So when council acquired the sportsplex this fiscal, that assessment became exempt. So it's not showing in the overall assessment value. The commercial actually did increase. And then also reflected on here, you can see year over year, the F400 exempt properties bylaw that council has, this went down substantially from last year because we exempted that property anyway. So that's why these numbers might look a little distorted, but really overall, we have increased by 10 million in commercial assessment. And you can see all there. So that just shows you the actual dollar values that relate to the percentage of the increase. All right, there we go. So again, it just shows the 10.3 in residential. This is the total value of new assessment residentially. There are new properties that have added onto the roll, and that value is 16.4 million. That's brand new accounts on the roll that weren't there last year. And we have 222 new dwelling units that were added to the roll. And again, part of the overall growth in assessment is because the cap is quite substantial this year at 5.4. And this just shows you the number of capped properties has risen. Sure. So this slide shows you by district, and I'm going to see if I can make that a little bit bigger for everyone, shows you where a lot of the growth happened. So you can see all of the items in blue are new construction building permits. And no surprise that District 7, which is Lance, is seeing an increase because there's a lot of growth there. There's also substantial growth in Mount Uniac, District 8. Also in District 9, Mount Uniac, sorry, this is quite small. And there was some growth in District 10, which you can see there. And then the rest of them, almost every district is seeing some growth, but these are your ones that are substantial in this fiscal. And this is regards to commercial. We've already spoke about it. There was a 10.4% increase year over year. And it's net of all of the items that council exempts in the F400 bylaw, which includes some not-for-profit community halls and so on. And there will also be a presentation this afternoon from PRC on the F400 bylaw and the changes that they're proposing for this fiscal coming. And there's no change proposed at this time for the commercial rate. We've held it in the document at 2.6 or $2.60 per hundred of commercial assessment. So that's something that council can also consider for this upcoming budget. This slide shows, it's not necessarily the highest build properties, but it shows commercial accounts with the highest commercial value. And it just gives councillors an idea of the larger businesses that are in East Hants and what the value of their commercial assessment is for billable. Not a lot of change year over year in the top 10. This account here in Uniac was added. And last year was minimal because it was just a lot of land and they developed that business in Mount Uniac. The rest of them have stayed fairly consistent. There is slight increases though in most of these large commercial properties. Smaller. There we go. And for council's benefit, we broke out the dwelling units that have been added to the roll. And you can see in Enfield, Elmsdale, and Lance, there was 116. So that's the large anomaly. There were also 21 in Maitland and 53 in the Mount Uniac area. So lots of growth still all over as reflected in the previous slide. And I want to make sure.
Sorry, Sue, Warden Rolston has a question. Warden.
Sure.
Yeah, if we could just go back to that last slide.
This one?
Yeah. You said 21 units in Maitland. I think that's 21 units spread among
all of them.
rural.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry about that. Thank you for
I was
bringing that
trying
to
to
my
think in
attention.
my head
Yes,
there were
sorry.
21 new homes were being built in Maitland. So.
Yes, my apologies.
I'd be happy.
Yes, I apologize. Maitland, Walton, McPhee's Corner, Knoll, Kennecook. Sorry about that. I should have said the whole. Yes, that's right. There's 21, which is still significant. There is growth in the rural area for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. And this just shows year over year in the change in dwelling units.
Okay, Council Knockwood, you have a question as well?
Yeah, you go back to my last screen, please.
Sure.
Yeah, you have 16 units in Shubenacadie and Milford. I don't think there's nothing in Shubenacadie and what we've done for the next couple of years. I don't know why you put Shubenacadie on there. I don't know what they're doing up in Milford, but I don't see nothing in Shubenacadie.
Yeah, I can answer
Jordan can
that
speak
one.
to that.
Yeah, so we grouped them by area. So that falls in, we group districts 3 and 4 together. So between the two of them, there are 16, but Shubenacadie itself had 1, which you'll see on the next slide. There's a graph. So the other 15 would be in District 3, Milford.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a good question. Oh, I think somebody else has a question.
Deputy Warden.
Yeah, just looking at the numbers for the 21 units or Maitland, that section, I had 6, 5, and 11 to get 22. Am I adding something wrong?
These are the districts, the district
Okay.
number, District 5, District 6, and District 11. I know that's a little confusing, isn't it? I was confused
Okay.
yesterday. I did the same thing when I was looking at the slide, but that's the districts. Yeah,
I just want anybody online to realize it wasn't those numbers.
correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? None? Okay, continue on, Sue.
So this here shows, as Jordan pointed out, by district, any new dwelling units. So you can see here, it's only gone up 1 in Shubenacadie, and it went up the rest that was on the slide here in Milford in that allocation. Thank you, Jordan. So I'm just going to scroll my notes here. And I think, Jordan, I have in my notes that this is where you're going. So I'll introduce Jordan Baltzer. He is the accountant and budget analyst, and he's going to take us through some analytical slides to present some information for council. Go ahead, Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everybody. So first, if you're following along on the online tax analysis document, we're referencing page 2 with this data. Basically, this is just another distribution of dwelling units. We have the prior year, or the 2021 year, and the 2022. That makes up your 10,666 units. Basically, the only thing to note on this slide would be when you look at the distribution area between the urban, the rural, and UNIAC, there's no change. It's still 56% of the dwelling units in the urban area, 27 in rural, and 17 in UNIAC. Okay. So this graph here, what we do, we take all of the single dwelling units in East Hants, and we sort them from smallest assessment value to largest. And then we plot 2 different bars here. We have the percentage of dwelling units in blue and the percentage of assessment value in yellow. And what this graph shows is that there's a smaller number of single dwelling unit homes that make up a large portion of the assessment base. And in 2022 in particular, there is one thing to note. If we look at the little blurb on the right, where it says that dwellings valued at more than 200,000 make up 36% of the number of units, but 59% of the assessment base, that number is a little bit different than it was in the prior year. In the prior year, that would have basically said that it was 31% of the total dwelling units and 53% of the assessment base. And what this is telling us is, because of the cap increase, market increases in assessment values, that more and more homes are having higher assessment values, and there's many more homes this year that are valued at more than 200,000 as compared to prior budgets. Okay. So this shows the 1 cent raises by district. This was a council request a few years ago. You won't actually find it in the tax analysis document, but we've been providing it for the last couple of years. It does give some useful information. So the total at the bottom, you can see the residential resource, our 1 cent raise is just over 193,000, and commercial is 14,563. Of note, on the commercial side, if you look at the percentage column on the right, you can see District 2, Elmsdale, Belnan, makes up 43%, and District 8, Mount Uniacke, makes up 15%. And large contributors to those high percentages would be the business parks. Okay, so now I'm referencing page 15 in the tax analysis. We're going to talk about the tax revenue. So basically, our shortfall budget to budget this year is just under 1.6 million. And we do an exercise each year where we say, if we were to keep the rates the same, based purely on assessment growth, how much would we be able to raise? And that number is on screen. It's just under 1.4 million. So it does not quite make up our shortfall this year. Also, you can see, again, we showed it on the last page, but for information, those are the 1 cent raises for residential resource at just over 193 and commercial at 14,563. Next slide.
Okay, just 1 second there, Jordan. We have Warden Rolston with a question.
Yes, so the amount to be raised from taxation this year is just under $1.6 million. And that says that's up from 538,000 last year. That doesn't sound, I was sure we raised more than 538,000 on taxation last year.
The number is correct. This year is a little bit of an anomaly, both on the expense and the revenue side. We all know what is going on with everything from economy, inflation. So our budget numbers are a bit higher as a result this year. So that's where the 1.5 comes from. It is higher than it traditionally is.
I'm not disputing that, but I really thought that we had to raise more than $500,000 on taxation last year. Perhaps I'm remembering wrong. Is that what?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is the addition to what you would know, what you had in your budget. So in addition to what you raised last year, you need $1.5 million more this year. In addition to what you had the year before, last year, you needed to raise 538,000 more money than the prior year.
Okay, that I find a very confusing way to state that. Like, what I would like to see is how much are we going to have to raise on taxation this year? How much did we have to raise on taxation last year? That's what those figures say to me, but that's not what they are.
That is correct, and I think we do have that on a slide coming up. But yeah, basically, I can tell you that
if I look at this, it's telling me that we have to raise 1.6 million on taxation this year, so that's what we have to figure, and that we only had to raise $500,000 last year, and that's not correct. So I just, I understand what you're telling me that it is, that last year we had to raise a little better than $500,000 over the year before, and this year it's going to be one, but that's not what it says. I'm just saying, I just don't think that's clearly stated. And, I think we would need a little table there and say, last year we had to raise this much, this year this much. Do a table for the last 2 or 3 years and then explain it or something, because I just find that confusing. Thank you.
Sure. But there is, I agree. We can add that. And there is a slide further along that might make it a little clearer.
I just think anyone from the public that read this document and looked at it would think the same thing. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that makes no sense. So, thank you.
You want, Jordan?
So Sue, do you mind just going back to the prior page?
Sure. There we go.
Just while we're on that note, if you do have the document, the actual PDF document in front of you, the 1.5 million, that does come from the same table where it would show what Warden is looking for, which would be the $22.7 million. That's the amount to be raised. So I totally agree. We can adjust this slide. It should be additional amount to be raised through taxation. But a table does exist in the Word document. And as Sue said, we'll be going over that later.
Sure.
We have a question from Councillor Rhino.
Just along the same line, I'm trying to figure this out. So the amount to be raised from taxation this year is $1,559,000. So if we kept the rates the same, those rates from last year would raise 138,100. So the difference in that is 178,000 we have to raise somehow, even if we, above last year's rates. Am I correct thinking there?
You are correct. And
right.
So Sue, do you mind going to the next slide now?
Sure.
That's a segue into our proposed tax rates. So because we don't have quite enough growth from pure assessment, we are proposing the residential and resource rate to increase by 0.7 of a cent up to 85.75 cents. We're proposing no change in the commercial, staying at $2.60, and no change in the $220 waste management dwelling unit fee.
Okay.
Yeah. And speaking of the waste management fee, Sue mentioned earlier that we did calculate our break even this year, and it comes in around $207 per dwelling unit. So that's why we're proposing no change in this fee of $220. We're comfortable with this, and that also calculates a projected amount of just under $135,000 to be transferred to reserves.
One second there. Councilor Tingley, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, through the chair. Can finance indicate just approximately how much that 0.07 cents would impact the average homeowner?
Absolutely. We have slides further on that show the
Okay,
tax burden.
good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're here, Jordan.
One more. There you go.
There we go.
So this one is for council's information, just a breakdown of our waste management costs by percentage. So no real surprise, waste making up 26%, recycling 23%, organics 16%, waste management center operations 18%. Between those four, that would make up the bulk of the waste management costs. Okay, so how does it all add up basically? We've gone over the assessment information and you've seen the proposed rates. So this would be the slide where you can see the amount to be raised through taxation. That would be the $22.7 million. Keeping our commercial rate the same and the proposed 0.7 of a cent increase in the residential and resource rate. No change to the waste management fee. And we have a small difference that's a transfer to or from reserves each year. This year, it happens to be $377 transfer from reserves. And that's how we arrive at our amount that we're requiring this year.
Questions?
Okay. So here we have, just to give some history, looking at our general tax rate, we have 5 years of actual tax rates and the proposed rate on screen for 2022. And the key point here is on the general rate itself, we have a high in 2018 here of just over 86 cents and a low in 2020 and 2021 of just over 85 cents. And all of these rates are within 1 cent of each other. So not much fluctuation on the general tax rates. And showing that in graph form, these are residential rates. So the bottom blue line, everyone can see that, that would be your general rate that we just looked at. This is over a 9-year period. So although proposing an increase this year, overall it has come down slightly. And then we have the rural rate showing in yellow. That rate has increased over the 9 years slightly. It does include the blue general tax rate in that number, but the main reason for the increase in earlier years would be due to increase in the fire levy in the rural areas. And finally on here we have the Enfield residential all-in rate, which overall has seen a decrease. Same type of graph, but on the commercial side, we have the general commercial rate, which is $2.60. And that has come down 11 cents since 2016. That was the high at the time. And included in, well, the commercial rate itself is included in the other two lines, the green rural commercial rate. So it's seen a similar trend, with the exception of the fire levies in earlier years that I'd mentioned. And then the blue line up at the top would be your Elmsdale commercial all-in rate, which has seen a fairly significant decrease over the past 9 years. Okay, so now we'll get into the tax burden, and this would be the section to answer Councillor Tingley's question, where we can see how the impact on a variety of different assessment values and areas. So for the tax burden, if you are following along, this would be page 16 in the tax analysis for the general tax burden. And we'll also be looking at page 17 and 18, which would be your all-in total tax burden. Okay, so starting with the general tax burden, of course, this just includes your general tax rate. Basically, there's a lot of numbers on the screen, but we like to give a variety of different assessment values for a variety of different areas around the municipality, just so you can easier see your area, how it adds up. For this particular graph, the only thing that makes a difference would be your assessment value. The rates are all the same. So when you look on the right-hand side, you see the percentage and dollar increases. They would be all the same for the $100,000 homes here. Doesn't matter if it's in the rural area or Mount Uniacke. If it's the same assessment, it's the same. And the range would be from 4.72% at an $80,000 assessment to 5.86% at a $400,000 assessment. And this is mostly driven by the cap of 5.4%. And we also have the proposed slight increase in the general tax rate. And the other number that's also included in here would be your flat 220 dwelling unit fee. And since that is flat, no increase, that brings the percentages down slightly. Okay. So the all-in total tax burden, this is the one that this is arguably a more meaningful table because it shows everything. It has everything included in the previous general tax burden, but it also has the other rates, such as fire rates, street lights, other area rates, urban service, wastewater management fees included in this one for the districts that it applies to. And basically with everything added in, we're still seeing the percentage increases around between 5 and 6%. And that's still being driven by the 5.4% cap for the most part. A notable exception would be in Shubenacadie. As was mentioned earlier, we reduced the water utility deficit rate from 9 cents down to 2.1 cents. So Shubenacadie is not seeing too much of an increase year over year. It's actually under 1% or $6, $13 for 100,000, 200,000 assessments. Pause here for a second. It's a lot of data, I know.
Yes. Okay.
Great. Now,
1 second there. We have a Councillor Musa.
Yes. Up here.
So if I look at the, let's say, Mount Uniacke over $400,000 homes, I see the increase 5.82%. So what that increase mean?
that increase would be mostly driven by your 5.4% cap and the slight increase in the general tax rate of 0.7%. And also in Mount Uniacke, there is a very small increase in the streetlight rate, which we'll go over later. And Sue, do you have anything to add on to that?
Oh, that's correct. We changed the L10 Uniacke safety lights up slightly because we're adding lights in UNIAC from 0.0036 to 0.0038. So you'd see that in here, and the slight increase in the general tax rate, and then the cap. So that's what you're seeing.
So you're telling me if a house in Mount Uniacke is capped at over $400,000, the increase in the cap is more than the house that assessed at 200?
I guess I'm not quite sure. Everybody sees a 5.4%, so it would be substantially higher, that percentage on the 400,000 versus the $200,000 home. That's in the cap.
So if someone have a house at 400 or 700,000, does that jump up 5.4% also?
Correct.
So every house across the municipality jump 5.4?
I'm going to say yes. Some cases saw slightly more because the market changed and they may have had a permit and increased a portion of the cap in their, a portion of their assessment might not be in the cap program because they may have had permits on a property, right? So, but overall in the UNIAC area, on average for a $400,000 home, they're seeing a 5.82%, which includes the 5.4% of the cap, the street light slight increase, and then the 0.007 of a cent increase in the general tax rate in the proposed document.
So what the meaning of raising the cap 5.4% if you want to do it all across the board? So that doesn't make any sense. Like if every house jumped 5.4%, you might as well keep it the same. It's going to be almost the same idea, right? Same like mathematically speaking, it doesn't make any sense if every house, because if your house is on a higher assessment, it should go down a little bit, or usually go down a little bit sometimes. Like I know I have multiple properties here, and sometimes I see one jumping and one going down, but this year everything is going up.
No, so I understand now what you're saying. Some capped properties may have not had the market might have changed on a property, but if they're in the capped program and they haven't done anything to their home, then they would likely have seen a 5.4% increase. That's what they would see on there. We have cases where people, like I mentioned, that did some work to their home, had a permit, so that portion of the work would not be in the cap program, which distorts things slightly when you see the percentages. But yes, you're right. In anybody that's in the capped program, this current fiscal that's coming from the roll would have saw a 5.4% increase.
So if you're not in a cap, like new construction, did that jump, or did that go down, or did that stay the same, or you never know?
So that would be the market. So whatever the PVSC and had assessed it on the market value. So commercial is, there's no cap. So that would be whatever the trend is in the market value of the property. And any properties that changed ownership, for instance, any which we had substantial property changing ownership this past fiscal, and the cap comes off of those properties. So they're no longer in the cap program. So then their assessment is based on market.
But they will go back after 2 years in a cap, right?
They would, correct. They would.
So yeah, so if I built a house last year and my assessment was 500,000, did that jump this year 5.4, or it's not in a cap?
If it's not in the cap, it would just be whatever the market is. That's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, because that jump in over 500,000, like over 400, and to the percentage is more like, that's a lot of money, like a lot of money, $246.
Correct.
Thank you.
So as we go through this, counselors can look at and provide direction to staff if they want to revisit the general tax rate, where the assessment cap increase is quite substantial this year.
Thank you.
Warden Rolson.
Yes, and yeah, the much larger increase to the capped assessments this year is certainly impacting homeowners across the board that are in that program. And even if we were able to maintain the tax rate, they would still see an increase just based on that 5.4% cap amount. I just want to, as we go into the discussion, and I'm sure we'll have good discussion, but just want to remind counselors that we did add some significant new items this year that are also impacting this budget, and that is the increase to the policing service. And when I first saw this number, I was impressed, I have to say, because I was anticipating, in order to pay for those increases, I was anticipating it would be a higher increase. And I'm sure part of the reason that it wasn't a higher increase was that 5.4% increase in capped assessments. So just my comments. Thank you.
Councilor Rhino.
Yeah, I'm going to follow along with the warden there. Really, when I'm getting this news, it seems to be somewhat better than what I ever expected with those increase. I mean, we're working toward that policing issue to try to resolve it, and there's a substantial numbers right there. But that's not to say when we get through this document, if we can cut things back, that I'll be pushing to do that, because like I say, you know, whether our tax rate increases by very much or not, you've seen the increase in the assessment, so people will be paying more. And it's, you know, it's hard for fixed income people in that. So, you know, I'm going to try to do, and I suppose every one of my fellow councilors will be trying to do what they can to even lower that possible rate increase, or come up with something else. So, like I say, but I'm a little shocked that it's not more. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing nobody, carry on.
Okay. So the next two tables you won't actually find in the tax analysis itself. This is another request of council a few years ago. We've been providing it ever since. Your historical tax burden. So we look over a 5-year period, basically. We take the assessment 5 years ago and we put it in today's dollars by multiplying by the cap each year. And then we kind of do a similar thing with the tax rates, the rates 5 years ago and the proposed rates today, to arrive at a 5-year basically variance in your general tax burden. And you can see in the 4 columns on the right, those would be your 5-year change in percent in dollars, and then the per year change, which is just divided by 5. And note again, this one is just the general tax rate, not the all-in. This here we are. And this is the exact same thing, but this is your all-in, everything included over a 5-year period.
Councilor Rhino.
Through you to Sue, commercial rate. Can you refresh me? I do believe that we lowered that within the last 5 years. Could you tell me how many times we did that? And just give me the information on that, please.
Sure, through the chair. So 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, it was at $2.70. It was at one point $2.71. Then council made the decision to reduce it by 5 cents. So it went to $2.66. And then council made the decision to reduce it another 5 cents. So it went down to $2.60. So it was $2.71, $2.70, $2.66, and then $2.60.
And that's over
approximately
over
4 to 5 years, correct. Yeah. And we held it last year for sure. We held it at $2.60. and we've held it in the proposed document this year.
Okay, comparatively to similar municipalities, are we on board with that? It just seems, you know, we're asking, you know, we've done a lot for business to bring down that rate, but we also, you know, we're asking the residential rate to, you know, to pay more according to this figure. So are we comparative? Because I think, you know, I know business is key. I understand that, but I think that it wouldn't be too far-fetched to, you know, put an increase on that rate just to help things out neither, because we've decreased it so much in the last 5 years. So kind of a couple questions here.
So council made the decision to do that in order to increase the commercial activity in East Hants, including the business parks. And that is successful. That has been successful. We're seeing that. We're seeing businesses develop in East Hants. And the assessment there is quite substantial. So that was the approach that council took in the prior years. I don't have readily available right here today outlining say HRM or Truro or any areas on the outlining areas of East Hants, what their commercial rates are. Obviously, we have been council's been setting those rates to be able to compete, I guess we would say, with, you know, Burnside or Halifax. So that's why we did that. And it is successful. Like businesses are looking at East Hants because of the rates and generating higher assessment. But if that's something that council would like to see, we could bring that back. Like it's quite difficult to do because we offer different services compared to other areas. And it gets complex, but it's something that we could look at if councilors were interested.
A couple questions. Oh, go ahead, Councilor Rondo.
I've been around for a number of years. I fully understand why we did that to attract business.
Sure.
And I think at the time, I was supportive in the fact, but not the amount of the decrease. I thought the decrease was pretty substantial right from the get-go. So I guess where I'm leaning at, I think this is my own personal opinion. Where I'm leaning at right now is I think that maybe that we should be par across the board, residential and commercial in the increase, and we'd still be drop that, you know, we still drop that quite substantially. That's where I'd kind of be looking at right now, if we can't find anything else in there. Like, so anyway, but I'd personally like a comparison to where we are with that commercial rate with similar municipalities. Thank you.
Hey, a few more questions up that.
The warden.
Go ahead.
The warden has a question.
It's Councilor Moose is on, and then the ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in favor of increasing the commercial rate because it's only 7% of the total assessment, and it's not going to make any difference. And we could hurt ourselves like by increasing the rate, because now we have very attractive business parks, and I don't see any point in touching that, because if we do increase the rate, it's I think that's why people come to East Hants, because our rate is very competitive and our service is great, and we only 7%, like for every like to impact like the residential tax rate by 0.1 of a cent, you have to charge the businesses more than 1.3 cents, I think, if my math is right. Thank you.
And
sorry.
Go ahead, Sue.
So just through you, Chair, just so councilors have an understanding, the 1 cent increase in the commercial rate would raise $14,500. So on the residential side, 1 cent raises $193,000. So we can certainly, depending on what council wants to do, we can bring something back if you want to, but it's quite minimal about how much the revenue would be raised per cent. but we can certainly look at that. And we can bring back other options if council chooses on how we could reduce the general tax rate if council wanted to go that direction.
Thank you. Okay, Warden Rolston.
Yes, thank you. Following up on the commercial discussion, yeah, at just over $14,000, 1 cent commercial, in order to mitigate that 0.7 of a cent increase in residential, you're looking at, you know, more than 10 cents of an increase on the commercial rate. And that's not, I don't think, in the times we're in, where we would want to go. Most of the businesses in East Hants are small to medium-sized businesses. And most of these businesses have been really challenged over the last 2 years, and you know, they're struggling to stay afloat. So I don't see this personally as the year to increase the commercial rate for the small amount that would be generated by increasing it 1 cent, 2 cents, or 3 cents. It would not impact our overall budget substantially at all, but it could be the tipping point for some of those small businesses to, you know, have to pay that extra amount. So I look forward to the discussion going down the road, but I'm personally right now, I'm not favoring looking at increasing the commercial rate this year. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Rhino will be up next. I just want to remind committee we have a scheduled break at 10:15. It's now 10:17. So we'll go with Councilor Rhino, and then we'll address if you want to take a break for 5 minutes afterwards. Councilor Rhino.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I wasn't intending to make up that shortfall totally on the backs of commercial growth. But I do believe that, you know, the residents are going to say, well, we've got an increases in the tax rate, and there's been decreases in the commercial rate. You can explain that to the cows come home, and yet a lot of people won't understand that. You know, I think if we have to raise some from the residential rate, I do believe that we should be looking at a slight increase on the commercial, just to help out things out. You know, you're looking at a lot of people are having a real tough time now. You know, grocery bills and so on and so forth are just astronomical. Things are going way up. So I think, you know, if everybody shared the burden, both commercial and residential, shared some portion of it, I think that then we're treating everybody somewhat a little fairer. But my intention is no way to make that total shortfall up on the backs of the commercial rate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I seen Councilor Tingley. I'll give you the floor, and then after that we'll discuss taking a 10-minute break. Go ahead, Councilor Tingley.
Yeah, through the chair. I agree with Eleanor's comments on the commercial, but I certainly agree with all of Keith's comments and the comments of others as well. This is probably not the time to increase commercial rates. And while the rates have gone down, it seems like there's been businesses moving in. So the total collection of taxes has probably gone up. And it represents such a small amount. I think we should just look at this at the end of the review of this budget and consider it. But right now, from what I'm seeing with the budget, I wouldn't be in favor of increasing commercial rates.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the time is now 10:20. Is the wish of committee to go on a 10-minute break? I believe that's what was scheduled in the agenda. There's a 10-minute break, so we'll go on break and reconvene at 10:30.
Sue, if you wouldn't mind stopping your screen share, just so I can put a break screen up, please. Thank you.
All right, everybody, are we ready to go?
I'm not sure if Sue is back yet.
Okay. Just give it a couple, give it a little bit.
She's coming right in.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So you can have the screen back if you'd like to screen share.
Thank you.
We're all set and continue on when you want to. There.
Okay, so I'm not sure if Jordan's back.
Well, I think he's pretty much finished now, and we're
I
on
think.
to, yes.
Okay.
So we can
Yes.
continue on with the PowerPoint presentation. Yes.
Perfect. Right here.
Yes.
Thank you, Janice. So Janice is going to take it away. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Sue and Jordan. Thank you very much for the slide presentation so far. So now we're on to talking about the analysis of the amount of new money to be raised. So right there, this is just a graphical representation of how much new money needs to be raised this year. So the 1.5 million is in the blue bar, and it shows that that's the additional amount of new money to be raised in the general tax rate. Of that, 1.4 million is growth from residential and resource. And then the silver bar is 1.1 million, which is additional money for RCMP, education, and corrections and housing. So in that 1.1 million, there's 960,000 for RCMP, 152,000 for education, and 28,000 for public housing. So that's just a graphical representation of what's happening for 22-23. Okay. So here, this is a comparison, which is on page 13 of the tax analysis document. So this is just a breakdown of what makes up that 1.5 million, the additional budget from last year, 21-22 to 22-23. So the first item is your departmental budget. So it's an increase by 586,542. That will be discussed in the business plans. That won't be discussed in the tax analysis. So that'll come up when we do the next presentation, probably in February. The next amount, which is our increase in general tax revenue. So that the bulk of that increase is 25,000 for our D-transfer tax, 65,000 of admin costs, which 30,000 of that is for our custodial, which is an internal service that we do here. And then it's offset by a decrease in revenue from the Shubenacadie water utility deficit rate. So as you recall in previous slides, it said that our rate decreased from 9 cents to 2 cents because the water utility deficit has now been paid off. It will be paid off in 22-23. Then the next amount, the fire revenue and expenses, the bulk of that is the 5.5 for the additional cost in WCP for 22-23 for the firefighters. Then in the transfers and appropriations, which I just talked about briefly, included in that number is 960,000 for the RCMP, 152 for education, but then we actually have a decrease in our landfill debt next year of 257,000. And then finally, our transfers to and from reserves. Included in that amount this year is new. We put in new money for transfers for $7,000 for aquatics equipment. We've been finding that in the budgets now, we're looking to additional equipment for the aquatic center. One of which was the dryers at the aquatic center. They started failing, or they're not drying as well as they should be. So they're looking to purchase them. So we thought, well, why don't we start putting aside $7,000 a year to help mitigate the cost of the equipment at the aquatic center. So it's just a small increase. And then we thought we'd bring back the $20,000 for planning studies this year. So there's $27,000 there for that. There's no funding this year for COVID-19. So there's $140,000 worth of expenditures really. So we're not transferring money in to offset the reserves this year. We have $140,000 that we can't transfer in this year. And then we're also transferring some reserves, $187,000 to mitigate the cost of the RCMP of $960,000. And then finally, there's a decrease in transferring from reserves to fund the landfill costs. So you see up above, we had a decrease in debt in the 938. Well, then we have an increase in transfers to reserves because now we don't have that to fund this year of $220,000. That makes up your 1.5 million.
Right, first question, Councilor
Okay.
Rhino.
Yes, thank you. What is the per officer cost this year for RCP?
180,000, I believe. Yes.
Correct. It went up year over year.
12.23%. Yes, through the chair.
Yes.
Is that due to the unionization of, or is that gone through yet with the RCMP?
So through the, okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Jean.
Okay.
Sorry.
So through the chair, there's a negotiated contract that came out in the news. So staff had sent an email to the RCMP to see if we can find out what the actual increase this year would be for 22-23. And our best estimate right now is an additional 12.23% based on what we've already increased the RCMP costs over the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It does not include the retro payment that they are looking for. It's just the per officer cost increase.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. So then the next page is basically the same thing. It's just talking about our shortfall this year from our general tax rate from, so if you turn to page 15 of your document, you would see that the shortfall this year is 1.5 million. The increase in residential resource growth is 1.4. And then the decrease from commercial assessment, that looks like we have a decrease. We actually don't. We do for the document, but we don't because of the way we took over the sportsplex. So if we looked at 21-22, which is this year, we had $14 million of assessment for the sportsplex, which equates to about $340,000 in revenue. So we have a decrease in revenue this year, but we also have a decrease in transfers to offset that cost. So really it's in and out, but it's distorted here in commercial assessment. So we actually did have an increase in commercial assessment, but the $14 million assessment for the Sportsplex came off. And you'll see when we go through the business plans, you'll see a decrease in taxable exemptions this year in the finance department. And then we have the increase in waste management fee, which is the additional dwellings that we had this year of 48,840. So the overall deficit that we're looking to raise this year is 129,281. And that's the proposed increase in the residential resource tax rate of 0.007 of a cent. Okay. So this is just a pie chart that shows what makes up the cost of the general fund. So you can see the RCMP, mandatory provincial transfers, fire protection, and assessment costs make up 43% of the GTR expenses, which for the most part are out of council's control. So the next is the urban service rates. So this is what we charge to folks that are in the urban service area. So 1 cent raises this year, 69,168. And the only proposed increase we have here this year is the Milford residential urban service rate of 0.01 of a cent. And that's to offset the cost of the wastewater costs in East Hants. And then the urban service rate discussion, budget to budget, will be discussed also in the business plans. Next. So then, so at budget time last year, we weren't quite sure what would happen with the Sportsplex rate, but right now we're holding steady at 4 cents. From the slide there, you can see that our debt charge is 352,831. So the reason the debt is a little bit less this year compared to what we had thought at budget time for 21-22 is because we used gas tax to fund the purchase of the Sportsplex this year. So we were able to reduce the amount of borrowing that we needed. And then we're projecting transfer to reserves of 158,595. So the one thing that is important to note about the Sportsplex, it's only in the communities of Shuby, Milford, Lance, Elmsdale, and Enfield. So not everybody gets charged that Sportsplex rate. Reserves at the end of March 31st, 2022 is projecting at 402,000.
Janice, we have some questions coming in here.
Sure.
First is Councillor Hebb.
I just want to make it clear that people in Nine Mill River pay that Sportsplex rate too.
Okay, I didn't have that on my slide. Sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right. Nine Mill River is District 9.
And Harvard Lands also.
Yes.
District 3.
Yeah, the way the area rate was done years ago, it was done on the old districts. So the old districts would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, and 10. So it's hard for me to equate that to the new districts, but you're absolutely right. Nine Mill River and Harwood Lands.
Thank you.
Next
Thank
up is
you.
the Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question to you, Janice. When is the Sportsplex rate going to be debt-free, or is that an ongoing rate forever?
I haven't looked at the debt lately, but I'm pretty sure that we have a balloon payment coming up in a few years. So I would say at least 10 plus years.
Okay, thank you.
Because we do have a balloon payment coming up in the near future, which we originally had funds set aside to pay, but now we don't because we used it now to purchase the Sportsplex itself.
So when that rate was originally put on there as a Sportsplex levy, there was no definite time frame.
Well, there would have been, originally we borrowed, I believe it was like 3.5 million as a grant.
Right.
So that debt is we're still paying off that original 3.5 million. That's still ongoing. And now we've purchased the Sportsplex this year. So now we have new debt, it's probably I'm going to say 20 years, hey Sue, when we borrowed that, the Sportsplex. Yeah, we borrowed it over 20 years.
25.
25.
So that's just added to the time frame.
Yes. Well, it's not to say now that the rate won't decrease. Right now it's at 4 cents. And the reason we were able to keep it at 4 cents was because of the growth in our area. I mean, we may next year, it may either stay at 4 cents or come down to 3 cents. But right now, the way it looks, 4 cents is a good number.
So any new home builders would know that going forward, would they? That if they were asking about events with property tax or taxes that would be in that area, they would know? Or they would only know when they got their tax bill?
Sorry, I'm going to have to defer that to the CAO or Sue. I see their hands up.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The current debt that was raised when the Sportsplex expanded was done a little bit differently than the last time when the Sportsplex was built. At that point, there was a set 10-year plan that we were raising taxes for the Sportsplex, and it would end at the end of 10 years. In this case, council took on debt to fund the expansion of the Sportsplex, and council of the day knew that that was a long-term plan. So that was anticipated to be at least 20 years. And then, at the time we said to council, and then who knows what, you'll probably be into another expansion or a major overhaul of the building or something. So it was a 20-year plan. Any new home builder or person moving into the community would see this as a stable rate on your taxes. So there'd be no reason for them to assume that it was going away anytime soon. And again, it's with our new borrowing, your assessments may change and change that rate. But like we have in the past, we would encourage you to keep that as stable as possible. And any funds that are raised additionally would be put into a reserve so you could pay for some of those balloon payments when the time comes.
Okay, thanks. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, Councilor Rhino.
A couple of questions. Following along the deputy warden there, can you 10 plus years on that rate, because District 5 has ratepayers for that Sportsplex. Not all, but anyway, by taking that over, I know there's a lot of information, but how many years have we added to that original debt by taking that over? Just roughly in years. We've added 5 years to it. Have we added 6 years to it?
Well, we definitely borrowed. So the new borrowing that we just did, we did that over 15 years. Sorry, we did it over 25 years with a balloon payment in 15. So like Kim said, if we took any surplus that we had and moved it to reserves in 15 years, we might be able to take that surplus in reserves and fund the balloon payment. So from right now, I would say 15 years.
So we've added 15 years to it.
Yes.
All right. No, because that question will come up, because they're going to say, how many years are you, I'm going to have to keep paying for this because we took it over. So, there's more information that goes with that, but that's going to be one of the questions. All right. My second question is, our budget year runs from March 31st, correct? April 1st, March 31st.
Yes.
Correct?
April 1st to March 31st. Yes.
Okay, so where are we looking at? What's the projection? Are we going to come in on budget, under budget, over budget from last year?
Right now,
what I'm getting at, I guess what I'm getting at is, if we were coming in under budget, that probably that extra will go back into reserve. Because what I'm trying to get at, if to help out this year, if we come in projected coming in under budget, maybe we could bring that forward to help out this tax rate because of all the events of COVID and what it's brought forth.
So through the chair, we are projecting a surplus this year. We haven't done all of the analysis throughout all the departments, But right now, we definitely have a surplus in our D transfer tax. So we're looking at between 800 or more than 800,000, hey Sue, in D transfer surplus.
Yes, we're over 1 million now.
Yeah.
So you're correct, Councillor Rhino. There is an opportunity throughout the budget process and presentation that we can look at the surplus that's coming in for the deed transfer this year to assist and phase in for the 2022 budget.
Yeah, because what I'm, when people are watching out there under this, and if we're projecting a surplus of 800,000, but yet we're saying next year coming up, we need 178,000 more, people are going to say, well, if you had extra this year, why can't you take that to keep?
Oh, no.
Saying?
We absolutely agree. We put the budget in front of you like this so that council can help us make that decision. And if they want to see the surplus from the D transfer go towards next year's 22-23's rate so that we can bring it in at the same rate as last year or even less.
No, it'll be interesting discussions, but for people watching out there, they're going to ask that question. So,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
CEO, go ahead.
So councillors, when there's a lot of work that goes into preparing this budget, and all of those things are taken into consideration at the staff level. And I guess from, every year for the past 20 years, I've probably said this to you at budget time, you can bring in money from your reserves to soften your tax rate increases. And for a variety of reasons, socially, economically, you would do that. The caution is, and it will catch up to you, is when you have committed to new expenses and new costs, like you have in the RCMP, for example, the increase is real and it's here to stay. So you're not going to decrease your RCMP costs over time. There's only more to come. This budget already has some of last year's transfer tax being brought in to soften the blow of the increase in RCMP. And I think that's appropriate given that sort of 12.5% of that increase is your per officer cost going up and not based on the decisions that you've made to increase your officer complement. But the more you bring in money from reserves to soften that increase, the more you have to catch up later in increasing your tax rate. Now, your assessments may catch up, but because your new assessments, I guess I should say, which wouldn't add additional tax burden to your existing taxpayers. And that is something that you can take into consideration. I understand exactly what Councillor Rhino is saying, and we have this conversation every year. And in the end, you probably will decide to bring money in from reserves to soften the impact of that tax burden on your taxpayers. But I would caution you that you've made some real decisions to increase the tax rate. Taking on the Sportsplex was one of them. We haven't seen the increase that we thought we would because assessments have kind of caught up and a few things changed throughout those discussions. But you've certainly made some decisions to increase your RCMP. And next year, you're going to see a significant impact on your education bill because once these assessments catch up on your uniform assessment, because our assessments are increasing faster than others across the province with our new growth, we will see an impact on that. So I know Councillor Rhino knows all that, but more for the benefit of the newer councillors, that is a risk of sort of softening the tax rate now for later. You're going to have to catch up at some point. And you're in the fortunate position that your assessments may just do that for you. But then you've already spent that increase in assessments of the new assessment. As that new assessment comes on, all you're doing is taking in less from your reserves, and you're not able to use that new assessment for the new services that come with it. So those would be my cautions.
Could I rebut on that, Chairman?
Yeah, you're up next to speak. Go right ahead, Councillor Rhino.
All right. All right. I'm just a simple man, but people are going to look at this and they're going to say, all right, you got a surplus of $800,000 projected. You have to make up approximately $178,000 or for lack of rounding everything up, $178,000 to keep the tax rate the same. So let's say $200,000 to keep this simple. So your projected surplus would then be 600,000. We're not going to wipe out that surplus. I understand building a reserve is important. There's no doubt about it. But people are going to say to me, well, Keith, you come under budget 800,000. You want an increase in tax rate to make up 178,000. Why didn't you just take it out of that? You still have lots of money to put away into a reserve to build that. And I understand there's going to be increased costs down the road, but that's what people are going to say. People are on fixed incomes. People who are up against it, they are going to this is what's going to come back to me. And really, that's what I'm looking at right now is that we'd still have a healthy surplus, and then we would keep the rate somewhere around the same. Thank you.
You're muted, Councilor Perry.
Thank you, Councilor Rhino. And the whole transfer tax is another conversation onto itself of how that gets put and where it gets put and how it gets spent. That will probably come up later in the budget cycle. So it's not just a straight 800,000 that we take and do that, because there's different earmarks for that as well. So, but definitely that's the beauty of us having this conversations and being able to set the budget. We can make those decisions near the end. So we have a few people up to speak. First on the list is Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, and maybe Janice, you can answer. Any idea what the balloon payment might be going forward and when that would be due?
I can actually look it up. So just give me a second.
Oh,
Okay.
I think Sue might have that.
Oh, so do you have it? Okay.
So on the previous debt, the balloon payment is due in 2025, and it's just under 1.4 million.
Okay.
So that's coming up. And then in future, with the current debt that we just borrowed for the Sportsplex, that would be 15 years from now, there would be a balloon payment.
And just the last, looking at the slot on your screen, the 158,595 goes to reserve. Would that be approximately the same amount every year that would go to reserve? Look, going forward?
It would depend on the assessments each year for that area rate. And
So
right,
it could go up or down.
it could go up or down, correct.
Okay, thanks.
I think too, if I'm not incorrect, so don't we have a principal payment next year too for the new debt? So the new debt will increase next year too as well, wouldn't it?
Correct.
Yes.
Well, we'll have a
Debt
principal
charges.
payment on the new debt. Yes.
Right.
We'll
Right.
have, yes. So in the next year's budget, not this year, we'll have a
Right.
principal payment on the new debt. So that-
23, 24.
23, 24. And we'll
Yes.
start, and that would have to come from the reserve that we're generating, like the area rate that we're generating the funds. So
Okay.
it would likely be less going into reserves if the assessments are the same.
Just to follow up, if I may, do you have a figure what's in reserve now?
Yes, it's right there, 402,278.
Okay, so that'll come from that next year.
Well, we're building the reserve. So right now it's
Okay.
at 402,000. And that's what we're projecting for the end of this year, 21, 22.
Right.
And then in 22, 23, we'll be adding the 158 to it. So that brings us up to like, I don't know, 560,000.
So
yeah.
your debt charges will come from your reserve.
The balloon payment we were trying to pay. So the balloon payment of 1.4 million, we were trying to set aside reserves to pay for that. So say, I don't know, just say by the end of what year did you say it was, Sue? At 2025.
25.
Say if we have 800,000, we can put the 800,000 against the 1.4 million. So then we'd only have to refinance 600,000, but that's all speculation at this point.
So where is your debt payment coming from next year?
So
The debt
what will
payment comes from your debt payment comes from your area rate, that 4 cents. So our
Okay.
normal principal and interest payments every year, which this year or for 22, 23, it's 353,000. That comes from that 501,426, which is what the 4-cent raises.
Okay,
So the
Okay,
difference
thanks.
between, right, so the difference between the two is the 158.
which goes to reserve.
Right,
Okay, that clarifies a lot for a lot of people. Thanks.
right. You're
The
welcome.
next slide too will help with that as well.
Okay, next up to speak is Councilor Tingley.
Okay.
I think my question was already answered. We were talking about that $800 or 800,000. But seeing the other expenses that we have coming up, I think I just need to wait and hear the rest of this financial report to know what our income and expenses and what the complete financial picture is before we jump to any conclusions to what to do with the 800,000 or any other funds that are in this report.
Thank you. All right, continue on. I just want to remind all the rest of the committee that you know, we're at 11:02. Committee was supposed to end at 11:05, so we're going to have to continue on.
Okay. So the next slide, this is including what we just looked at. This includes what the Sportsplex operations are for 22-23 based on the East Hants Arena Association. So they gave us a revenue of 1.8 million, but in that 1.8 million is the 501,000 we just looked at. And the expenses down below includes our debt of 352 and our transfer of 158. So this is the information that was provided to us by the East Hants Arena Association. So your salaries, your supplies, your operational costs, services, vehicles, and buildings plants. Is that okay? That's all I have for that one. So that's new this year. Okay. So the only other tax rates includes our street lights. So the only other change that we have there now this year is in the safety lights for Mount Uniac. It went from 0.36 of a cent to 0.38 of a cent. And this increase is based on the new lights that are being proposed for that area. And then
I have a question on that, Janice.
Okay.
Because those new lights are paid for out of the Uniac gas tax. So
this is, sorry.
So why is there an increase if we're already paying for the lights without the...
So through the chair, there's still power and insurance and insurance and power that gets the cost of the street lights itself every year. So that's what the increase is for.
Okay, good.
It's not it's not to fund the capital. Yeah, it's not to fund the capital. It's to fund the operations of the street lights.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then the 1 cent increase for the Milford area rate, which I think we already talked about. Okay.
Okay.
No other changes. The next slide is the fire departments. So this is what the this is what the simulation shows us this year for 22-23. It looks like the fire department's levy will be 3.1 million. The actual based on 21-22 is 2.8. So it's a variance of 275,000. And you can see that Mount Uniac makes up 72,000 of that. So we haven't heard from any of the fire departments and whether or not they want rate increases. So we're expecting councillors to have a conversation with the fire department chiefs to see if the rate that they have last year it will be the same for this year, or if they need a decrease, or if they need an increase.
So I would just add that an email did go out to the fire chiefs, and the fire chiefs are aware that they would go to their area councillor and propose any changes, and then councillors can bring it back to us and we can incorporate it into the budget.
Yes, and the fire departments are undergoing their budget process now to get those numbers to come back to the councillors as well. So I would expect in a number of weeks we'll start hearing back from them.
That's great. So this is just a summary of what's happening with the fire department. So we just talked about the levy of 3.1 million. There's debt charge recovery revenue there to fund the Lance Fire Department. The grants this year went up by 5.4%. So you'll see that 62,112 is increased from 5.4, and then the emergency fund is at 13,697. The only other change there, which we don't have on the slide, but you'll see it when you go through the tax analysis, is there's an increase there for WCB of $5,500. And everything else is status quo. Training dollars, risk management, and the Traumatic Events Counseling Fund is funded through the revenue of the levy. That's it. That's all I have for that. So then we get into the uniform assessment, and I don't know if that's a good place to stop, but this is just a slide to show you how the uniform assessment is calculated. And as per conversation that the CAO just mentioned earlier, right now, the uniform assessment is increased by 2.7%, which is why our education costs is increased by 2.7%, because it's based on the uniform assessment. Now, that assessment is based on 2020's roll, not 2021. So next year, you probably will see a 10% increase based on the growth that we had this year in 2021. So the uniform assessment is used to figure out the education costs and corrections and PVSC costs. And like it says there, East Hants assessments usually outpace others.
And maybe just the last slide to finish the education, if council wants to move.
So the education cost this year is increased from by 552,000 from 5.682 of last year to 5.835 of this year. And then of course it's based on your uniform assessment, which I just said, which is 2.7%. So would you like to stop there? Or do you want me to keep going?
I think we'll it's a good stopping point there.
Okay.
The director recommended we'll stop there and we'll come back.
Okay.
We're gonna get through the next item, number 14. Thank you, Janice. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Sue. The next one is going to be the 2022 polling district review report number 1. John Woodford, you're up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just bring up my. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this is the once every 8-year polling district review that we're required to do. The MGA specifically states in section 369 that in the year 1999 and in the years 2006 and every 8th year thereafter, the council shall conduct a study of the number and boundaries of polling districts in the municipality, their fairness and reasonableness, and the number of councillors. So it's a mandated study. There's no way not to do it. And following the completion of the polling boundary review, municipalities are required to submit an application to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board to either confirm or alter the number and boundaries of your polling districts. And the application must be submitted by the end of this year. If it looks like 1 year, we actually had to write to the board and ask for an extension, but you are obligated to finish it by the end of the year unless you get an extension. And the last time out, there was actually a fair bit of back and forth. In the 06 review, it went pretty smoothly. We made one submission and it was accepted after one hearing. The last time out, not so much. Council applied to reduce the size of council from 13 to 12. And the board rejected that and ordered council to set its size at 11. And we resubmitted with 11 districts, and then they rejected the submission for boundaries on 3 districts. So we had to redraw some boundary districts. And then there was also a mapping error that had to get corrected. So actually it wasn't until May 2016 that it was all settled before we finally were able to give that to the returning officer to get ready for the election. So I guess that's one of the reasons they ask you to do this 2 years before an election in case there are issues. And the board directs that the review be done in 2 phases. Firstly, to determine the number of districts and councillors, and then secondly, to determine the boundaries for those proposed districts. And both phases are supposed to incorporate public consultation. And the key considerations for the size of council are things like the desired style of council, the governance structure of council, and a determination of an effective and efficient number of councillors. So one example that they give for governance structure of council would be an example from HRM where they have community councils, and those bodies are like a sub-council, if you will. They have the ability to make decisions on some planning and recreation issues. So that's a different style of governance than we have as an example. There aren't a whole lot of other examples. It's really, I think once council gets into the discussion about it, it's really what you expect of yourselves, what style of council. And then once the appropriate number of polling districts have been determined, the second phase of the process, that of distributing and delineating polling districts, needs to begin. And the board has established that there should be a plus or minus 10% variance between districts for the average number of electors. They will consider higher variations up to plus or minus 25%, but those are, they call special circumstances. If a very strong case can be made for a variation because of factors such as community interest or geography. And the greater a proposed variance from that plus or minus 10%, the greater and more detailed the justification required will be. And the board indicates that it expects municipalities to utilize census data, electoral lists, property assessment information, and building permit data when considering the appropriate district boundaries. Obviously, the population has changed since the last time we did this. And building permit data should be used to justify variations in voter parity for areas where significant growth has occurred and is expected to continue. And the example they gave was from Clayton Park West in Halifax, where a variance up to minus 20% was deemed appropriate because they knew there was an awful lot of development that was about to happen there. Nice parallel to what we're seeing probably in Lance, and we'll get into that in a future report. So staff are in the process of completing an initial analysis of demographic data for the existing polling districts derived from the final list of electors from the 2020 election. The most recent census data, which would have been a snapshot of the municipality in June 2021, is expected to be available next month in February. And so we'll obviously look at that. And we'll also, again, look at those specific growth areas such as Lance through building permits and other development approvals. And so based on direction from the board that focuses strongly on target variations and comparable voting parity between districts, the 2020 final list of electors will be a very important tool. However, there were not elections in 2 districts, 3 and 9, where councillors were claimed. So that's again where we'll use census data as a proxy for electors. And then another issue that is completely discretionary, the council doesn't have to look at it, but mayor versus warden. Section 12.8 of the MGA enables council to switch to a mayor system of leadership from a warden system. And in the last 2 reviews, council did look at this. In the end, decided to keep the warden system, obviously. And that decision can be made prior to any election if you pass a motion at least 9 months before the election. It does make some sense to consider it within the scope of a polling district review, given that it might impact your view on the size of council if you also have a mayor. However, and I think one of the reasons that council in the past has not gone forward is that it's not reversible. So if you move to a mayoral system and you decide you don't like it, you can't go back to a warden system. So this is just a table with the proposed steps, I guess, in the project. So phase 1 would obviously involve gaining some public input on the size of council and whether a mayor warden system of leadership is preferred. And that's if you direct us to include that in the review. And then phase 2 would consist of seeking public input in the setting of the boundaries and the proposed number of polling districts. And the draft schedule would have us wrapping up in about November this year. And beyond that, obviously, it's completely at the board's discretion when they hold a hearing and when they make a decision. And any changes to polling districts wouldn't be implemented until the next election in October 2024. In terms of consultation, what seemed to work fairly well last time were 3 community meetings in different regions, Corridor, Uniac, and North Central. In addition, we did an online survey. Now, obviously, with the COVID restrictions in place, we may have to come up with an alternate online event if we can't meet in person by, say, April. So we'll follow that pretty closely. And then again, we should be in a position, if we follow that schedule, to submit to the board by the end of the year. So the recommendation is that staff be authorized to conduct the 2022 polling district review using the process outlined in this report, and also to provide staff with direction as to whether a review of a mayor versus warden system will be part of the project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We've heard the presentation, and Councilor Rano is first up.
Just a question through you to Joan. Where COVID is and puts these restrictions on that it has right now, could we not ask the government right now to extend this for a bit? Because you know, if we're gonna, this is in a rural area, this is quite an issue out here, and if not everybody has access to online and so on and so forth, and a better way to do this is through the public meeting process in person. So can we right away ask for that just because of COVID?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we can always ask, but it is in legislation. It's not just a guideline from the board. It's embedded in the MGA. So, but we can ask, of course.
But I'm pretty sure that MGA was written way before COVID ever come here, right? So I'm thinking that maybe we can gain a little bit if we have to have those in-person meetings before. So that's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Next up, Council Knockwood.
Okay, thank you. Now, in addition to review a mayor or a warden system, now, if you're around for mayor, you would have to go all around the municipality to campaign, he or she. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get into that. That would be, I guess, the subject of a future report, Mr. Chair. But yeah, I mean, the mayor would be elected at large versus elected in a district and then selected by council. So it's a very different thing.
Now, I don't know how long did we campaign last time. I know last time was pretty hectic, year and a half ago almost. Is that 5 weeks, 6 weeks? That'd be some busy person who running for mayor, I would imagine. I'm not really favorite of county mayor, I guess it's called, I guess. Kind of like the ward system, I guess. Warden system. Thank you. That's all I got to say.
Okay, next up, Councilor Tingley.
Yeah, I don't know enough about what would be better, a mayor or a warden system. Maybe the CAO could speak to, you know, whether that should be looked at or not. You know, I would think whatever benefits the residents the best is the way to go. But I would have no idea what would be the best decision, a mayor or a warden. So I'd like to hear more about it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the mayor versus warden system is really simply a choice. There's obviously more representation at the council table. If you choose to go with a mayor, you have one extra seat that isn't representing a particular district, but that sort of is representing East Hants at the table. Really, if you want to hear more about it, you should get the report. I believe we did one last time, John, on mayor versus warden. So we can bring back a similar but updated report to council as part of this process. And I think you should, before you discount it, you should probably hear the report. But again, it's entirely up to council. It's entirely up to you whether you even want to go there or not. We haven't in the last 2 times the issue has been brought up with council, 2 or 3 times, but it's entirely up to you.
Councilor Tingley, would you like to request that report be brought to council, or are you just going to wait for now?
Yeah, I'd request that the report be brought to council. I'd like to hear it.
Okay, so there's a motion to bring the report to council. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Knockwood. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll be looking for the question.
Question.
Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. All those in favor of bringing a report to council, raise your hand. Contrary? Motion has passed. Okay, next on the list, Councilor Musa. Oh, you just muted yourself, Councilor.
Okay, thank you. John, with all the new subdivisions like in Mount Uniac and Lance and Elmsdale and stuff, wouldn't be that used as a ground to gain another year to see how those gonna develop in the near future? Like in 3 years, you never know. Lance might be fully grown and Lance may stay the same. So I don't know how you're gonna make your assumption on that. And I know like Mount Uniac have probably 200-300 extra homes that could be done in 3 years. That could take 20 years to do. So how are you gonna do that? Like,
through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we would, obviously we use 2020 as a starting point. How many electors were there in every district? Then look at population growth since then, based on what we can catch in the census. And then beyond that, it's what do we catch by building permits and so on. So yeah, of course, if we have an extra year, then you're going to have an extra year of data. But we also, you know, there's a pattern that we can follow as well. I guess one of the other questions would be, what do we expect the population to be by the election in October 2024 is, I guess, one of the questions I would ask.
yeah, but you have no idea how those big developments gonna go, like how fast they're gonna go, and like probably by population, and in 3 years, Lance might need 2 councilors instead of 1.
Yeah, and so through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, anything we do outside of actual population is going to be conservative. Any projection that we use would be conservative. But the other thing that may happen is you may, when you get to the next election, even though you don't have to do one of these, you may decide to do a polling district review in 4 years' time. If there's, if you see that one district is completely out of sync with the others.
Oh, so you still can do that without like.
Yeah, they're mandated every 8 years, but you could do one before every election if you so
Okay,
choose.
I see now. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Councilor Musa. Next up, Councilor Rana.
Yes, based on the current COVID restrictions, I'll see where this goes. I would move that we write the government and ask for an extension based on these COVID restrictions, so we can better have possibly have those meetings in person. Thank you. That'd be I so move.
I'll second that.
You're muted, Mr. Chair.
Question?
Sorry. Discussion, Warden Rolston, you're up. Sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. Just a quick question. Should we perhaps give staff some guidance as to how much of an extension we would be looking for, like 6 months, a year? I don't know, because we do want to have it done in time, to prepare for the next election. So just asking if there's any suggested time frame of the extension.
As the mover of that motion, I would be open to suggestions on that. Eleanor or Warden, it's just to the fact is, as I stated there, I think these meetings should be in person, and the current COVID restrictions are going to put us behind in this whole process. So whether we pick 6 months or a year, I mean, not totally up in the air, but I do believe that we should at least ask for that extension based on the restrictions. Thank you.
I just think that if the government were to be receptive, they would be more apt to be receptive to, a specific timeline rather than something that was open-ended. So, thank you.
How would everybody feel about a year's extension? I'll throw it out there.
So by a show of hands, who would be receptive to including it in this in the motion for an extension, a time up to a year? Can you raise your hands if you're in agreement with that? So the majority has it. So we'll add that to the motion, that it will be up to a year extension based on COVID. Okay. All right.
Question on the motion.
Question's been called. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion has passed.
No, the motion was moved.
Or sorry, motion was moved, yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how long it'll take to get an answer back from the province. And I guess what would be good today, in addition to the report on the mayor versus warden, would be to get authorization to carry on with the rest of the project up to public consultation, I guess.
You're muted, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. So we'll look for a motion to grant staff the ability.
I'll motion that.
Moved by Councillor Tingley,
Second.
seconded by the Deputy Warden.
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is passed unanimously. All right. Thank you for the report, Mr. Woodford. And that brings us to the end of corporate and residential services. I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn corporate residential services.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Knockwood. All those in favor? Aye. Corporate residential services is adjourned. Turn it over to Councillor Musa for Infrastructure and Operations Committee.
We're gonna call the Infrastructure and Operation Committee to order. The first item is the approval of the minute of December 14, 2021.
So moved. Seconded.
Move in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Okay, the next item is Shubenacadie wastewater treatment plant construction budget. Jesse.
Okay. Shubenacadie wastewater treatment plant construction budget. Prior to going to market for the construction of the Shuby wastewater treatment plant, and in order to support project timelines, staff are requesting approval for additional funding for the existing, prior to the review and update of the full capital budget. Currently, the approved budget is $5,500,000. Having been increased in September 2020 to reflect the costs of the Burgess Road portion of the project, which it rose initially from $450,000 to $840,000 post design, and again to $1,150,000 post construction tender based on the market conditions. The increase in Burgess Road costs were highlighted in September 2020 as something that could reoccur at the full plant construction phase. Several different engineering consultants have been contracted to support the design and provide cost estimates throughout the life of the project. In 2018, municipal staff received an updated estimate from the engineer who worked on the Milford wastewater treatment plant project on behalf of the municipality, using his knowledge of that project and other treatment plants that he has designed in Atlantic Canada, combined with information contained in the municipal sewer capacity report that was completed by WSP Engineering in 2015. He provided a project estimate for the 2018 funding priority report that listed an updated project cost of $4.5 million. The project budget increased again when the scope of Burgess Road was added, and increased again based on the market to 5.5 million in 2020. The current design engineers, CBCL, have provided an updated total project cost estimate of $7,705,000. The Shubenacadie wastewater treatment plant is at maximum capacity and is an aging infrastructure asset, having been built in the 60s. There is a need to build a new plant to replace the old infrastructure, and also to address the capacity issues that have been put all development growth in the area on hold. The municipality has been awarded $3,520,000 in grant funding for this project to be received upon completion. To proceed, an additional $2,205,000 must be approved for a total project budget in order to proceed. So staff are recommending to approve additional funding to enable the continuation of the project, and the recommended motion is as shown on the screen. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd open up for questions.
Thank you, Jesse. Councilor Garden-Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Jesse, I just have a question about that. It states that we've been awarded a $3.5 million grant. When applying for those grants, which obviously you do, what comes back, the amount that comes back, does the province base that on the total cost, which at the time would have been, $5,700,000, or do they just allot that amount, and regardless of if it goes up by 2 million, that's still what they're willing to contribute?
Excellent question. Through you, Mr. Chair, it's now common practice that funding is set upon the number submitted. So once your project, a funding application goes in and it's been awarded, that amount is set regardless if you go over an increase. So you can't go back and ask for more money. And if your project comes in under that price, you can still only receive up that to a maximum, and it would go down based on the percentage of the total spend. So for this project, it was 40% federal funding, 33.3% provincial, based on that original scoping of 4.5 million. So that kind of worked into that number. That's the fixed amount that's available to us.
Okay, so you can see where I'm getting that the fact that it may be going to be, possibly going over, or is going to go over, if there'd be any point in going back, but obviously that's the amount. And okay, thanks, just wondered.
Next, we have Councilor Knockwood.
Thank you. So what was the large increase from like 5.5 to 7.7 million? Because it seems like a short period of time that like the Burgess Road was increased by 1.1 million there once post-construction and tenders. Like, what was the cost like?
So yeah, and that's the one that we're struggling with. This is a significant increase from the estimates, right? So in a short period of time, no question. And we've had a lot of internal discussions at the staff level over this. It's trying to understand that. A bit of it's market pricing, but some of it's scope to a point. We've rationalized scope through CBCL. If we would have went with original scope, that number would have been higher, but we had to go through. They started forecasting a much higher number, and we started rationalizing nice to haves versus must haves based on the performance that's required for the plant. But it's the differences of what was calculated from multiple engineering consultants. The overall scope hasn't changed for the project. It's the complexity of what needs to go into the plant based on what level of detail went in. And I don't have an exact, I can't say that concrete increased by this amount. We don't have that level of detail because that level of detail wasn't in the original estimates. It was ballpark estimates compared to overall lump sum costs of plants at the time. So we don't have detailed estimates at each stage. You ramp up each level. So market's driving it for sure. Over the last 2 years, commodity pricing has changed drastically due to the pandemic, but I can't blame that solely on that. There's been multiple engineering, great minds. These are all reputable firms. All are very well versed in plant design, and it's a large increase. I don't have an exact, I can't pinpoint it exactly. We don't have that information.
Okay, thank you, but it's a must need in the Shivanakti area. Thank you very much.
Councilor Ryan.
So through you to Jesse. So Jesse, just so the award from the grant funding was awarded before market costs come in?
Through Mr. Chair, no, what happened was we went out and sought out a professional opinion to validate estimates before we went and applied for the grant. But that was based on the state of the world in 2018. That's when we applied for the grant. So it's a fixed moment in time. So a little bit of inflation comes into factor, and a whole lot of market condition comes into factor, and a bit of unknowns or on technology costs that fluctuate. So 2018 is the fixed time. We did do we did outsource professional expertise to give us an estimate at time of funding application in 2018. But we update in detail as we go further.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at, would every contractor know that we received a grant of 3.5 million
Yes.
before they went to market?
Through you, Mr. I apologize in procedure. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, our funding awards get they're public information. In fact, there was a funding event in Shubenacadie with the MLA and MP at the time of the day, press releases. So very well advertised the funding that was awarded to the municipality.
Well, I guess everybody can bring their own conclusions. I'll say no more on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. The next, Warden Rolston.
Yes, thank you. And this conversation begs, I know, questions that have been asked before and discussions we've had. We're required to have these discussions around budgets for projects and that in public. And I have zero problem with conducting meetings in the business of the municipality in public. But when it comes to budgeting for major projects like that, it has always been somewhat counterintuitive to me that we have to do this in the public realm so that all of a sudden everybody out there knows how much we have in the budget for this project. So how many companies are going to come in at the $5.5 million, knowing that there's 7-point-some million in the pot? And I don't know if there's any way around that. I don't know if that's up for discussion at any time with the province to, allow budgeting for major projects to be done in camera until such time as we go to contract and the bids come in. Yeah, it just, you know, if I want to buy anything and I walk into, you know, I walk into a gentleman's farm and I say, I want to buy a horse and I really like that horse. I've got $6,000 to spend. How much do you want for your horse? That's not how you do business. You know, you walk in and you say, how much are you asking? And then you negotiate. And this whole, you know, having to budget in public before we go for pricing, it hamstrings municipalities and it costs the taxpayer. In my opinion, it costs the taxpayers dollars that might not otherwise be incurred. And I know in the past there's been nothing we can do about it. So, you know, I don't know, is it a discussion point that maybe we could even raise with NSFM or something, that, you know, there has to be a way around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Next, Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally agree with Warden Ralston and hope maybe that's something we could look at as a reasonable way to bring it to the public once it's once we've got our ducks in order. But as we know, as Councillor Knockwood just alluded to, this is something that has to be done, and you know, and our hands are kind of tied when it comes into over you know, over costs, but it has to be done. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, Jesse, do you know yourself what the competition is like for contractors that are bidding on these projects now? Is there just so much work that's what's driving the price up?
Through Mr. Chair, there is a lot of construction happening in Nova Scotia, especially around the periphery of HRM. So we are, it's the market's in favor of those bidding on projects right now. It's not those that are putting out the work. It's just on the supply and demand curve, we're not on the right side right now. There's major projects happening everywhere. Examples I would give, the Cogswell interchange, massive undertaking that will be starting in downtown Halifax. There are other plants going on across Nova Scotia, and major overpasses, all driven through infrastructure funding. There's been major infrastructure grants that have been awarded across the country, and they're all happening at the same time because that's how the grants worked. A major funding push out across the country all at the same time with the same deadlines creates a huge differential on supply demand curve for cost. It shifts everything. So that is happening right now.
Well, we know what the supply and demand is doing on residential houses, so maybe it's the same thing on the commercial side of things. But 41% to go, the price to go from up 41% from 2018, as Councillor Knockwood said, seems quite high. But you know, maybe that we're just caught in the wrong time here.
That's all, Councillor. Okay, thank you. Councillor Green.
I would move the recommended motion.
I would second it.
Move and second. I have a question for Jesse before the. So Jesse, if the motion failed and we didn't agree on the increase, could you go with them to the market with the 5.5 million you have and do the tender? And if you come with within like $1 million, can you come back to council with that, or we have to do that?
So, through Mr. Chair, that is the situation we're in regardless. We need to go out to market, and whatever the market comes in may cause another decision. And this is what happened in Burgess Road is we went out to market. We had increased the budget and it still came in higher. Well, it could come in lower. So if we did not approve this motion, if council chose not to approve this motion, we could still go to market. The prices will come in, and then we'd have to come back to council with a modified request for whatever the situation is. The challenge being is we're not close, and so we don't believe we're going to be close in a situation where if the bids come in close to what we have budgeted, it's more realistic to be able to negotiate with the low bidder on certain aspects that might be able to bring us into budget. To go to market with our current budget, we don't believe there's any chance for negotiation to hold the budget line. So it just creates a challenging situation when you're going out to market. And it sets us up better process wise to have the approval in advance. It's more honest with the market. So if the market knows that we haven't allocated adequate funds based on current trends, folks may not bid because they don't think that we'll go proceed with the project. It could cause some issues.
Oh, all right. So we have a motion on the floor, guys.
Question.
Any question? Question being called. We go to the vote. All in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Okay. Our next item is 2022 infrastructure capital funding priority. Jesse again.
Perfect. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff are anticipating another round of federal funding to come early in the new calendar year that would be in support of shovel-ready projects. It is standard in these application processes to have a record of a motion where council endorses a funding application and to proceed with a project. Staff have reviewed our capital budget to consider internal resourcing, our strategic priorities, what projects already have been approved to proceed, and monetary values to get the right fit for a potential project application if such a program came out. One project is being recommended for funding application endorsement, the Enfield Water Treatment Plant Capacity Upgrade Project. So from a financial stance, I'm going to flag this right now. We're in a similar situation as the Shubenacadie Wastewater Treatment Plant. However, we have more updated numbers as of mid-December on the Enfield Water Treatment Plant. And we're looking to go out for funding at 2.2 million versus the current budget, which is 1.3. And we plan to have a detailed report on that in part of the budget process, where time's not as critical for proceeding with the project. So we're going to do a full explanation of that through the capital budget process in end of January, February. But to go out for a funding application with an endorsement at a higher amount based on current markets is believed to be the best strategy to maximize an opportunity. And the Enfield Water Treatment Plant is required to expand based on our increased demand. So staff are recommending that council support a funding application and to make a resolution. And I would like to flag that there isn't an official announcement. Staff have been encouraged to be ready for an announcement in the coming weeks, and that it would need to be shovel ready and that it be water and wastewater focused. And so that's where we really narrowed down to just this one project. There are other projects in play, but the order of operations where we need to do a project to keep up with the development demands. It needs to be in a certain sequence. So it doesn't make sense to apply for funding for something we need to build 3 years from now when we have this right in front of us as an immediate need. And so that's why staff are recommending this sole project at this time. So that's what I have for the report with the recommended motion as listed, and would open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Jesse. Anybody have a question for Jesse? Okay, Councillor Hab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't have a question, but I'll move the recommended motion as presented.
Second.
Okay, anybody have any question? I have a question for Jesse anyway. Jesse, the reserve we talked about in the previous one is the urban service rate reserve, right? Like the funded for the Shubenacadie?
I would seek out Sue's assistance to comment on reserves from the previous.
It is the urban service rate reserves.
Yeah, so is that healthy reserve to be able to fund this one too? So there's enough.
This one in particular would be the water utility reserve.
Oh, that's a different one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I would add to that through you, Chair, Mr. Chair, is that staff went through all of our reserves in sequence of when things could be funding, what reserves were available, and that was a factor in what we were putting forward and when as well. And so the CAO, myself, Director of Finance, we've gone through, we've changed some of our plans to space things out to make sure there was reserves available at the right times for these different sequence of projects.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. Okay, I'll be looking for a question or a motion.
Question.
Question being called. All in favor? And the motion passed unanimously. Our next item is in camera contractual issue. So we motion to go in camera.
So moved.
Seconded.
Move in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously.
You just give us a moment.